Have you ever lost someone dear to you? Maybe it was the death of a loved one, or perhaps you just grew apart from someone who meant a lot to you. Well, Anohana decides to explore both of these devastating types of loss, showing how each can leave its own scars and wounds, and this is how it breaks you. I can distinctly remember the first time I ever watched Anohana. It was a warm summer's day, and I thought that this slice of life drama about a group of teenage friends would surely help cheer me up, and maybe even help shed some light on my own life, as I struggled to navigate early adulthood. I was pretty naive at the time, and was completely unprepared for how this show would impact me emotionally. When we're first introduced to our two main characters, Jintan and Menma, it's pretty obvious that something's not right. To start with, our protagonist Jintan has become somewhat of a hermit over the last few years, and would rather spend his summers at home playing video games instead of hanging out with his friends, which is something I still find pretty relatable even now. But of course it's just not that simple. After all, there's normally always a reason why someone would lock themselves away in their room and remove themselves from society. I mean, I think we can all relate to this sort of self-isolation. It's a pretty common experience for someone to go through, especially after an intense overload of feelings and emotions, or the exposure to some sort of trauma that we're unable to process. This sort of self-isolation can quickly snowball and grow over a long period of time, if not dealt with correctly, and you can even find yourself slowly beginning to romanticize the idea of being alone, and having no problems, no one to bother you, and all the time in the world to do whatever you want. And, in my opinion, this level of self-absorption can be extremely detrimental to your mental health, if not dealt with correctly. But, like I said, there's nearly always an emotional catalyst involved that spurs on this type of change in someone's life. And it's made pretty clear to us all that Jintan is really struggling to cope with the trauma he's gone through over the last few years. And this is where it finally hits you. Menma, the girl who was once full of life, is dead. Her existence is some form of traumatic manifestation of Jintan's deepest, darkest emotional scars. Her childlike appearance stemming from the fact that she died when they were both much younger, and tragically, this is the last version of Menma that Jintan ever saw. On top of all of this, we realise Jintan has not only lost his childhood best friend, but also his primary caregiver, his mom. It's now pretty apparent to us that these events were the emotional catalyst to his depression, and he's chosen to isolate himself from everyone around him as a form of dealing with all of this trauma. He's bottled up so many emotions and feelings that it's driven him further and further apart from those closest to him, like his old friend group and even his dad, who are probably the only people on Earth who understand exactly what he's going through. Jintan is not only dealing with the loss of his childhood best friend, but also the loss of his own identity, as he now struggles to navigate the adult world. Where he was once the strong, charismatic leader of the friend group, he's now the hermit, isolating himself from everyone around him, even his family. Throughout the story, we see that Jintan and his dad share a very similar traumatic bond, due to the fact that they've both lost the person dearest to them. But unfortunately, Jintan's reluctancy to open up about his feelings, and instead bury everything deep down, causes the two to become estranged, to the point that his dad has no idea what's going on in his son's life, which is quite heartbreaking to think about. We can probably all relate to that growing divide between children and their parents as they grow older. I can distinctly remember how embarrassed I used to be at the thought of anyone seeing me talking to my parents, to the point that I was almost ashamed of them. Or how annoyed I used to get at them over the simplest of things, whether that was them telling me what time to be home at, or not allowing me to do something, which was probably for the best considering it was nearly always something stupid and ill-advised. But all of this anger towards my parents stemmed from the simple fact that I just couldn't communicate how I really felt deep down. And just like Jintan, it wasn't until I matured and reflected on myself that I realised they really were my best friends, who had my best interests at heart, and would always be there for me no matter what. Throughout the story, we also begin to unravel the exact reason why the original friend group fell apart after Menma's death. Just like Jintan, the entire group was severely traumatized after her passing, and instead of coming together as a group of friends to try and process everything, they ended up internalizing the whole situation and going their separate ways. Once again, highlighting to us that self-isolation can be extremely detrimental, especially if it's triggered by a traumatic and emotional experience. We begin to slowly see that if the group had all just come together as friends and aired their thoughts and feelings, no matter how selfish some of them may have been, that there would have been no reason for them all to fall apart and isolate themselves from the people they cared most about. But once again, this is something that we've all probably gone through at some point with our own friends. Anohana really does show us that although life can be painful and sometimes unbearable, it's almost always better to communicate how we feel with those closest to us, regardless of how selfish your thoughts and feelings may be. A problem aired is a problem shared, and it's always easier to deal with things together rather than apart. Communication is key, and that's something we're all probably guilty of forgetting, especially while we're growing up and feel the need to isolate ourselves from the world around us. Thankfully, Anohana forces us to reflect on the nostalgic ideals we have of our childhood, and lets us view ourselves from an outside perspective through these characters. It really forces us to come to terms with our past self-destructive behaviours, in the hopes that we can learn to love and communicate once again, just like Jintan and the others did. I think we can all agree that growing up kind of sucks. It's really not that easy to navigate through life. And as you get older, there's one truth that always rings true. Life is tough. Gone are the days of childhood where everything seemed so easy. Time doesn't flow like it used to, school and work drag, and your sense of adventure and wild imagination begin to dwindle over time. And it's here that you realise the importance of Menma as an active character in Anohana's story. She might be dead, and what we're seeing of her is only a figment of Jintan's imagination. But her presence serves as a way of reminding us, and Jintan, to never lose sight of who we really are. We may be older and more jaded now than we were before, but that innocent, childlike version of ourselves that existed all those years ago is still there, even if it's buried deep down. We could have gotten to know Menma through various flashbacks, but I think her being present in the story as a ghost really drives home all these feelings and emotions as we see them through a first-person perspective. It's almost like Anohana wants you to face your nostalgia head-on and recount your own childhood experiences with your friends and how simple life used to be. Personally, I know myself that as you get older, you tend to long for that childhood innocence you once had and all the nostalgia that comes with it. Back then, you really were the most authentic version of yourself, and there's something incredibly beautiful about Anohana reminding us of that. Menma is one of the purest depictions of childhood innocence and whimsy that I've seen in any form of media, and this makes her death even more tragic. As you realise that this young girl was robbed of her entire future and will never get to grow up like everyone else. Youth and death work really well when juxtaposed in this manner, and it really makes you reflect on your own childhood. Where Jintan reflects our adolescent selves back at us, Menma mirrors what a lot of us used to be like as kids. This type of melancholy nostalgia really impacts us as we begin to appreciate our lives that little bit more, even though it's a bit bittersweet. There's a piece of Menma in all of us. We're all capable of emulating her selfless and positive nature, and I think this realization made me move forward in a completely different trajectory. Much like Jintan, I could easily continue to dwell in self-pity about my past, but instead I think Anohana made me appreciate the fact that I had a past, and will also have a future, unlike Menma. I can't say I've ever had a childhood best friend pass away, and I'd imagine that not all of us who've watched Anohana have either. However, I think we can all relate to Jintan's struggle, and the important messages that Anohana tries to highlight regarding grief and nostalgia. As you can see, Anohana really invokes a lot of self-reflection in oneself, and helps to highlight the fact that we should be thankful for our existence. Even if in the moment it may not seem like it, things could always be worse, and we should try our best to continue on, and live every day like it's our last. Because we never know when it might be, and unfortunately, today might just be someone's last. One of the most important parts of Menma's character is her selfless nature, which is further highlighted by the fact that her biggest wish all along was to come back and grant Jintan's mom's wish, which was to make Jintan cry again. She also goes out of her way to try and reunite the friend group, as she can see how badly they're all suffering deep down inside since her death. Her childhood innocence is on full display here, as it's clear to us that she would go above and beyond for those she cares about. Even in death, she prioritizes those around her, which is in direct contrast to the rest of the group, who are being entirely self-centered and want Menma to go to heaven as soon as possible, in the hopes that it will benefit their own selfish desires. I think this is a beautiful way of making us all realize that as we all get older, we tend to become more and more self-centered. We dwell on our own feelings and emotions more than those around us and tend to always put ourselves first. Where there was once only love and kindness in our childhood, there are now strange feelings of resentment and jealousy brewing deep inside us. Whether it's something small like Anaru wanting Menma to go to heaven so Jintan might fall in love with her instead, or Popo wanting his own closure for her death as he feels responsible for it. I know for a fact that when I was growing up, I really began to view the world through a narrow and selfish lens, and seeing this reflected back at me through these characters really made me reflect on the type of person I was when I was growing up, in comparison to how much kinder I was as a kid. Maybe this is because as we get older we start to realize the harsh truth, that life is not as simple as it once was, and those feelings tend to fester within us and cause us to be a little bitter, especially during our adolescence. Anohana really makes you think about your past feelings and behaviours, and it's this inward reflection that can really break you as a person, as you start to realise that maybe you're not staying true to your childhood self, which tends to be the most undamaged and untainted version of you. As we get older, we tend to struggle a lot with our own identity and sense of self. We become too self-aware and self-centered and begin to care what others think about us. Anaru is the perfect example of these self-centered concerns, as she is constantly changing who she is in an effort to try and fit in. Wearing these different types of masks, depending on who we're around, can be extremely exhausting, and I think it's something we're all a bit guilty of doing in our lives, especially nowadays with social media. Whenever a new popular trend starts, we almost always feel the need to get involved in it, and our sense of selves end up a muddled mess of various beliefs and ideas, and we tend to feel like we should emulate whatever those around us are doing in order to be liked. We begin to crave external validation from our peers, and start to resent certain parts of ourselves that we fear might be deemed as uncool or unattractive, when in reality it's those quirky little parts of ourselves that really make us who we are. I mean, as kids we had no idea about the world around us and weren't self-aware enough to care about what others thought. We were all able to express ourselves freely and be proud of our niche hobbies and interests, and all we really wanted to do was share them with those around us. Jintan's self-loathing and resentment towards himself is the perfect example of how damaging this mindset can be. I think we're all probably a little too hard on ourselves, especially these days when we are constantly being subjected to so much external noise. Whether that's comparing ourselves to other people that we see online, or looking over our shoulders and wishing things could have been different for us. It's only when you start to get older and mature that you realise what other people think of you really doesn't matter, and life would be so much easier if we all just wore our hearts on our sleeves, expressed how we felt, and didn't internalise every fear and worry that we have. Because 99% of the time, the people you're afraid of embarrassing yourself in front of are feeling the exact same way as you, and all you really need to do is think like your childhood self, and just express yourself authentically. I think this sort of self-reflection really hits hard, especially if you watch this show in your early 20s after you've somehow managed to navigate the difficulties of your adolescence. And just like Jintan says during the final few minutes of the show, time passes and our lives go on. Sometimes we really do need to reflect a bit on our past and use it as a catalyst to learn and grow and push ourselves forward, hopefully becoming a better version of ourselves. And it's in the final few minutes of the show that we probably all realise that we can never go back and change our past, no matter how much we want to. But what we can do is strive forward and lead a life that we can be proud of. Friends and family may come and go, but one thing we will always know is that we are loved, and we should continue to spread this exact same love to those around us, as you never know when it could be the last time we see them. By the time I'd finished watching Anohana that summer's day, my whole childhood had flashed before my eyes. As tears started trickling down my face, my younger sister found me on the living room couch and asked if I was okay. I wasn't entirely sure how to answer this question, so I just smiled and said, "I'm fine, thank you." And as she turned to leave the room, I called out to her once more, "Thank you for everything." Anohana really was an emotional roller coaster for me, and I hope some of you watching this video might be able to relate. Maybe we're all a bit guilty of being overly nostalgic, always looking back over our shoulders at what could have been, longing for those warm summer nights with our childhood friends, when our lives really seemed so infinite. Overall, I think Anohana really made me realise that although life can be so hurtful and cruel at times, we only ever get one shot at it, and it's important to make the most of that, because you never really know what the world might have in store for us next. This is how Anohana breaks you, by forcing you to face the death of your childhood and the painful birth of growing up. I hope you all enjoyed this video.